Without a sense of caring, there isn't a sense of community.
Welcome to Island Influencers, where we share stories of successful business owners, experienced professionals, entrepreneurs and community leaders based or with influence in the Isle of Man. This podcast is brought to you by Thornton Chartered Financial Planners, because great financial planning has the power to change your life. Now here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner Sharon Sutton.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Island Influencers podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs and community leaders based in the Isle of Man are invited on to share their stories with us. I'm your host, Sharon Sutton, and thank you for joining us. Today I'm joined by Ravina Talbot. Ravina came to the island in 1975 for 2 years and ended up staying for 45. She was the mother of a millennium baby in 1979, and her second child was born on the TT course, undiagnosed breech birth. And as you can imagine, being a qualified nurse and a midwife, this was quite a shock. She's well known in the island community and has worked in the public, private and third sector. This style has enabled her to work across sectors: tourism, hospitality, management, charities, churches, you name it. She's also supportive of her husband's projects and has been in the commercial, political and charitable sectors. And he's the founder of the Manx Credit Union, and both have been involved in the regeneration of Peel Cathedral. Ravina's main work these days is for the Open University, where she tutors students in health and social care faculty. And this is why particularly it's great to have her on as a guest, given that we are currently undergoing the coronavirus pandemic and the Isle of Man is effectively on lockdown for the next 21 days. In 2012, Ravina founded the University of the Third Age based on the Isle of Man, and in 2018 formed the U3A ukulele group. She also plays bridge and holds a monthly U3A social bridge club at their home. So welcome to this week's guest on Island Influencers, Ravina Talbot.
Welcome, Ravina. Hello.
Hi, thanks, Sharon.
I'm so pleased to have this conversation with you remotely as we all self-isolate on the Isle of Man, and to hear about what you've done over the years. But I'm particularly interested in sharing your perspective in the work that you've done, which you'll share with us later. But during this world pandemic of coronavirus, about people's mental health and their well-being concerns. I mean, it's a great opportunity, I think, to learn about your recent work with the UK Neighbourhood team and a team of carers, to hear about how you've been working together to share your expertise, knowledge and skill for the benefit of the community. And I think there are valuable lessons that our listeners can apply to their aspects of their own lives, organisations and businesses, especially currently. But to kick up our conversation, I'd like to go back in time, if that's okay. I'd like to ask you about you and your life on the Isle of Man and how you've ended up coming to the Isle of Man and staying here. In other words, your story today. Right.
Well, I came in 1975 and I was brought over, like most women, by the husband, who had been headhunted by a company. And we came over and said we would stay for 2 years. And if we liked it, fine. If we didn't like it, we would go back. And we've been here 45 years. And he was headhunted by a company that you may well know called Walton's Television.
Yes.
Which we ended up developing and owning, really, part share owning with a fellow director. But it was a great company, one that served the community and one that actually operated as a family. Lots of long-time employees there. So we were very happy, really, in that setting.
Yeah. Oh, that's really, really good. What happened then? I mean, how did you get into your role? Because you started as a nurse, didn't you? And then you...
Yeah, my original career is basically nursing. That's what I went into. Yes. And it was basically because I'm a people person, really. I'm very much into interacting, engaging and networking. They're really things that I've done all my life. They're almost second nature. So I came to the island with these skills, and in the end was after my second child, I decided to contact the local hospital to see if they needed anybody, and they said, can you start in September? So I was given 3 months to organise everything, and bearing in mind I have no relatives here, that was incredibly difficult.
No,
and
absolutely.
In those days we were doing 12-day shifts.
Gosh, yeah, it seems well, I suppose from a health worker's perspective right now, there's quite a few of them doing at least that at the moment. So what happened then? Because normally the structure of my podcast goes and asks a few questions, but I know that you read a particularly important book to you during your career, and that sort of was quite.
I read. Yeah, it was Charles Handy, and it was in the early days when I was developing my career. I was moving up into management levels, and Charles Handy was a big influencer on me, and really talked about the future, about being a portfolio worker. And I thought that just made common sense, really, for me in my position. Yeah. So I sort of adopted that 20 years ago when nobody else was really talking about it. And, of course, it was awkward because I didn't fit into the established slots because I was very much agile, very much flexible. And really, it was quite difficult, to be perfectly honest. People didn't understand it, and people didn't really accept it because they only had a very fixed model. So I'll give you an example. I moved sideways from health service into social services. Yeah. And my friends in health service said, "Oh, this is very bad news. This is awful." So I said, "Well, why?" I said, it's the first time they've actually employed a nurse in social services. And that was because people were being placed inappropriately, and they wanted by social workers, and they wanted somebody with nursing experience and knowledge to be able to do an assessment so that people who needed nursing care went into the nursing homes and people in social care stayed in the social residential homes. So I couldn't understand why this was. And my nursing friend said, "Oh, you'll never get back, by the end of your career, you'll never get back into nursing." Yeah. So I thought, well, I'll take the jump. And I jumped. And now, really, I can see where they were coming from, because a lot of nurses have just stuck with the NHS for all their lives. And whilst that's very laudable, and many of them, of course, who trained with me are very senior in health services now, I also think it can narrow your vision in how you actually assess things. Yeah. So I'm much more holistic in my approach.
Oh, that's useful to know. Thank you very much for that. Of all the things then that you've done throughout your life so far, what things are giving you the most fulfilment? What are you most proud of?
Well, I'm most proud of my open university achievements, really, and that's purely because I was told when I was 11 that I was a failure. So I failed the 11 plus. I had no qualifications to get into nursing. I was told to go and work in a factory. I remember going to careers, it was so-called careers advice, which was one lady behind a desk, and she said, you can go into the mills. And my mother, who spent 40 years in the mill, said she's not doing that. So they said, well, we've got nothing else for her. So she took me home, and I sat on the sofa for 6 months till our friendly GP said, would you like to be a doctor's receptionist? And so I said, well, yeah, I went to be a doctor's receptionist. And he gave me the route into nursing.
Okay, and one thing led to another, and here we are having this conversation.
It's always the same. It's always networks and people that are there just at the right time.
Good. Well, I'm very, very thrilled that that's happened to you the way it has, Ravina. That's great. Could you tell me how you've helped in this current crisis with the COVID-19? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, well, first, my academic role is as a virtual tutor for the Open University. So it's been incredibly difficult for me because, of course, all my students are training to be nurses or social workers. So most of them are incredibly stressed. They are trying to manage on a number of fronts. And the studies, really, which is the most important thing to them, is actually becoming way down the list. And then now contacting me saying, how can you help us to get through this course? Because, of course, they've paid for it. Yes, so I'm dealing with all that. On a strategic level, I'm also involved in the Open University teaching committees, Board of Studies, and the AL Associate Lecturer Assembly. So I'm working very much at strategic level, trying to keep all the wheels turning. I have to say, I think the Open University have been fantastic because they were built for this, distance learning. Yeah, sure. And everything's going really as normal. But it's just the reassurance that people need.
Yeah.
On a personal level, I was asked by somebody in Wales if I would throw together something to help people who were struggling with mental health issues and well-being during this crisis. The reason why they asked me is because a few years ago, my son was diagnosed with schizophrenia. It was a very traumatic time in my life.
Yeah, sure.
And as a professional, I suddenly realised that everything I knew went out the window because you try and deny it. And it was only when we finally realised and he was sectioned that we actually got to grips with what we needed to do. At that point on the island, I discovered that there was very little support for carers. Most of the organisations that do third sector caring had ring-fenced areas. So if you're a carer that had somebody with Alzheimer's, that was okay. If you're a carer with somebody with Parkinson's, that was okay. If you're a young carer, fantastic. But there wasn't anywhere for me. And I, like as I always say, clapped out carers who were exhausted with it all. Yeah. So I set up the Manx Care Association, run that for 7 years to help people like me navigate through the process. And as a result of that, it's given me lots of basic pragmatic approaches really to advice and guidance for people who are in that situation, which I then just put together as a PowerPoint. Really happy to share that with your colleagues.
Yeah, that would be great if you could. That would be. Yeah. We could put a link in our show notes and be able to actually share that to across the social media platform, which people tend to share very very usefully.
It's not singing and dancing as my OU colleague said in Leeds the other day when I told him. He said, "It's not got any flashing frogs." Then I said, "No, it hasn't got any flashing frogs. It's very basic, very simple, and it will take you 5 minutes to get through it at the most."
That's really great, and thank you so much for sharing. That's so valuable. I mean, what is becoming more and more apparent as we go through this, and as the Isle of Man government have just told us all to self-isolate for 21 days, basically. I think we're all going to face personal challenges, and how we come out of this, it's going to define many of us throughout our lives. I think it really will. So any help that we can have, we're all in it together, aren't we? It's no one's unaffected.
You asked me what my favourite quote was.
Yes, I did.
I'll give it you now.
Okay.
It's by Anthony D'Angelo.
Yeah.
And he said, "Without a sense of caring, there isn't a sense of community."
Very true. No, thank you. That's very profound. Well, if we'll put this information and we'll put it in the show notes, then people can go find that, can't they?
Yeah, I mean,
that will help.
One of the slides is basically helping people develop a self-care plan.
Yeah.
So it's very basic, a few questions, and everybody will respond individually to the questions, but it helps you plan to just remind you of what's important.
So, Ravina, well-being is particularly important during this time when we're home 24/7, many of us. What do you do to relax, and how has that changed? How do you keep your life in balance?
I try and get outside. I'm very blessed that I have a garden and I have an allotment. And we only got the allotment about 5 years ago because we're both busy people and we wanted to do something together. And we've got this allotment in the most beautiful setting. To be honest, that's all we need because A, we're actually blessed we're doing it together. B, we get to eat whatever we produce or smell whatever we produce. And C, we're getting exercise. So it sort of ticks all my boxes, which is exercise, eating. Sometimes I have to read about what plants I need to put in. So reading's another good one. Yeah. And walking, because I can walk around the allotment, So those are key things for me. Exercise, reading, walking, and just keeping in touch with people.
Yeah, and so important to know with this sort of medium. We're meeting remotely. You're via the Zoom platform, which is we've used it extensively in our business, and it's just great. It's so helpful. Yeah. You can even share screens on it. So, where would you recommend people go to otherwise for resources? We mentioned Charles Handy's books. Have you got any other books you'd want to recommend?
I did think about this, and I have got one that I really enjoyed.
What's that?
Which is, you may have seen it, it's called The Immortal. Have you seen this one?
I haven't, no.
It's great.
Gawande.
They actually have got it in Douglas Library. I asked them to get a copy. I mean, one of my areas of interest is an ageing population, and that actually talks about how we medicalise everything in our society, whereas often we don't need to.
Yeah.
So it's quite a refreshing sort of critique on health.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how COVID-19 affects those sorts of issues, isn't it, really? Well, I mean, what would you say are the main challenges that the Isle of Man faces right now with what we've got and how we're dealing with it?
Well, apart from COVID-19, because that's probably the obvious number one priority at the moment, but I've got 2 or 3 other concerns really about the island. One is the ageing population. We have got a massive demographic shift on the island. We're not alone. This is across all the nations, and we're going to have to deal with it. The second concern I've got is about access routes on and off the island. I think for businesses, I've just lost 5 flights from Flybe.
Yeah.
Just for work. You know, my family live in the Netherlands. So unless we actually on the Isle of Man have key access routes protected, then people will start to question why bother staying here.
Yeah, I'm sure they're working on that, aren't they, with Flybe?
But it's a beautiful island, but we still need to actually work. We still need to have family. And, you know, I work with older people now, and a lot of the people now are saying, well, you know, the balance is tipping at the moment. So, you know, government needs to actually grasp that. It's not for the sake of me not having told them, I have to say, because as chair of the U3A, we were the first to ask for an older people's champion. Yeah. It's been refused, which I think is very narrow-sighted, short-sighted. Yeah, sure. The reason why we asked for it was because we did some, Dr. Wardle, myself, and Dr. Sarah Headley did some research. We did a comparative analysis with the northwest of England. Yeah. And we discovered quite a few things, really, that were amazing. One was that the calculation that they were using was out of date. The second one was that there was very little data being collected that was relevant to how we make decisions for the future. And the third one, I think, was the fact that, you know, they need to grasp that people have choices and can move off the island. And if they go, they take their assets with them and their expertise and knowledge. Yeah. So we put that to government. We did a presentation. It's on our website still if you want to have a look at that.
Yeah, well, again, we put it in the show notes so we can
send you a link to that. It's called, it's old now, but it's called Not Old But Gold. Good. So I'll send you a link.
Nice title. Yeah, okay. That's great, Ravina. Thank you. So what solutions and opportunities could you see if you were, say, in charge?
Well, first thing I'd do is, of course, appointing an older person's champion. And Dave Cretney volunteered to do it for free and was still turned down. The reason why is because this is not about health. It's about a much wider remit. Yeah. You know, I've got a HR background as well. And what we need to do is start looking at how, if people are going to be asked to work longer, how we're going to adapt the workplace. How are we going to adapt work practices? Yeah. How are we going to develop training? Because people are not going to have the one job for life that they had years ago. So we're going to have to train and retrain, and all that needs discussing. And I think with the older generation, we've got fantastic resource there that we could use. So I would like to see that person. There is an older person's champion in Ireland and Wales, and it works really well because they cover everything, you know, including health, but much wider remit, housing, design, everything. Yeah. Whereas here, every time I raise it, all I get is we've got third sector people in health that we talk to.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to hear you say that, because in my role as a financial planner, you know, we find that, you know, the kids go to school, they have a really good education, and they come out, somehow they seem to miss out the term that they should have discussed equities and bonds and how the money system works. So financial capability is a massive part of that. I mean, if you don't mind me asking, and I do this primarily when I meet people in my role as a financial planner, I mean, what's your earliest memory of money, and how was it for you growing up?
Well, I grew up in a working class environment, no inherited wealth. I have never had a penny of inherited wealth. So everything I've had to work for. My earliest memory was jam jars.
Nice.
So we had jam jars, basically, and you had a jam jar for the electrician or the electricity, the coal man, jam jar for this, jam jar for that. The second earliest memory I've got is I was a child member of the Foresters organisation, which I don't know whether you've heard of, but
I have actually,
It's a Canadian sort of mutual insurance sort of company.
Foresters, it's one of the older ones.
Yeah, I'm still in it, actually. But I started that sort of about, my mum and dad were in it, so I got enrolled at about 6, and they gave me a savings account. Mm-hmm. And then the other one I had was national savings, where you got a stamp into a little book. Yeah. So I was brought up quite aware that money, didn't grow on trees, and the philosophy has always been if you could, well, it was then, if you couldn't afford it, you couldn't have it. Yeah. They didn't really have mortgages or debts. They tried to stay out of debt. The other thing that was interesting, and I've maintained this, is I was also, because I was brought up in a Christian family, I was also encouraged to give 10% of whatever I earn away, and I still do. I just feel that's been a blessing to me. I've had far more back than I've given away in many ways, and I include my health in that. So that's been quite interesting but good concept for me growing up. But the best
very important lesson there for everybody.
The best tip I had in my life, which I can't recommend to any of your viewers, but I married a chartered secretary and an accountant, so that was fantastic.
Great. All the attributes, I hope.
Just, a few.
Great.
It works both ways because I meet his care needs.
Yes, I'm sure he won't mind you saying that at all.
No, he won't. No.
Where can people go to learn more about you and the work you're doing through the organisations and things?
Okay.
If you put all those...
Yeah, I'm on social media. So I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, Instagram. I also have a self-catering, which is called Stansfield House. So I'm involved in tourism there. The U3A, I'm still running groups. I've started...
Your ukulele band.
I started ukulele group 2 years ago. We actually met this week for the first time using Zoom. Yes. And we are now setting each other a challenge. So... this month's challenge is to post a photograph relating to Easter with the ukulele in the centre of it. So we've all been working out. We've had some fun doing that, and then we're learning more difficult songs individually, and then we're going to meet up next week and play them. So it's really important. Their motto for U3A is live, learn, and laugh, and I think that's important.
That's a good life lesson for everybody. Especially at the minute. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's really great. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Ravina. We'll make sure if you send us all the details, I'll put them all in the show notes. So listeners can go and find them and can help themselves. We'll put a link to your wellbeing guide on our website as well. So,
Oh, great.
Do that for you.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's really I'll send fabulous. You the stuff. Yeah. And like I said, if it helps people, that's all I'm interested in. Yeah. I think you're doing a great job too. I think this is a lovely idea.
Oh, thank you very much.
Encouraging for everybody, really. And I'm sure your audience will find it fascinating to meet different people and to keep in touch, really, because that's really a very important aspect. Yes. When we're actually physically separated, we can still touch and meet heart.
Yeah. That's sort of why we did it. Although, of course, this was not at all. I mean, we've timed this podcast because of this, but we launched it completely just with no idea this was coming. So, but thank you very much for being such a great guest and sharing your knowledge so freely. That's marvelous.
That's all right.
Thanks, Ravina.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Island Influencers from Thornton Chartered Financial Planners. To find out more and for useful links, visit thorntonfs.com/podcasts.